A starving mountain man leads his daughter Eliza into the town he despises. He just wants food. But Eliza stops, pointing at a woman in rags. "Pi," she whispers, "isn't that Grandma who died?" Josiah freezes. The woman he'd mourned for 15 years was alive, and the brutal lie he'd been fed would change everything. In the high granite mountains, the wind does not whisper. It speaks a single, cold truth. You are small, and the mountain endures. This was the only sermon Josiah Thorne had listened to for a decade. He was a man carved from the rock itself, a silhouette of broad shoulders and silence set against the eternal snow. He had turned his back on the lowlands, on the chattering, scheming world of men, a world that traded in poison and called it politeness. Up here, above the timberline, there were no lies. A bear was a bear. A storm was a storm. Death was honest. But Josiah was not entirely alone. His fortress of solitude held one small, warm light. Eliza, he would call, and the name itself felt strange on his tongue, too soft for the hard air. She was 8 years old, a child of the high lonesome, with her mother's eyes and his own stubborn chin. She was his only link to the world he had forsaken, the one piece of grace he had salvaged from the wreckage. He was raising her by the mountain's code. You look an animal in the eye. You speak the truth, even when it cuts. You respect what is real. Josiah honored that code in all things but one. He carried the heaviest lie of all, a stone in his gut he had held for 15 years. He had taught Eliza about the stars, how to read a track, how to find water beneath dry ground. He had also taught her about the dead. We are all that's left, little bird. He had told her one night, the firelight, catching the frost on the single cabin window. Your mother, she's with the stars now. And my own, my mother. He always paused there. She is gone, too. A long time ago, she was not strong enough for the world, and it broke her. He had let Eliza believe his mother, Maeve, had perished in shame, a story fed to him by the one man he had ever truly feared, his own father. The lie was a wall he had built around his heart, and he had built his cabin right behind it. Their life was a rhythm of survival. Mornings meant checking snares, the sharp crack of his axe splitting pine. Eliza would be inside, tending the fire, her small hands already learning the weight of the cast-iron skillet. She knew no other world. She had never seen another child, never known the touch of anyone but him. She was pure, a thing of the mountain, and he intended to keep her that way. He was her protector, her teacher, her father. He was her God, and he was a God built on a flawed foundation. But the mountain demands its due. This winter was not like the others. It came early, with teeth of ice, and it did not let go. The snows piled higher than the roofline, sealing them in a white tomb for weeks. The wind shrieked like a grieving woman, a sound that got under Josiah's skin. He watched their stores dwindle. The dried venison, gone. The flour sack, a dusty memory. The potatoes, frozen and rotten in the root cellar. He had hunted, but the deer had moved to lower, impossible valleys. Even the rabbits seemed to have vanished. He watched Eliza sleeping. She was thinner. The hollows under her eyes were darker. The mountain's truth was simple. They were starving. He looked at his rifle, then at the path leading down. He despised the lowlands. He despised the town of Despair's Pass, a scab of a place huddled in the valley, smelling of stale whiskey and old sins. He hadn't set foot in it since the day he'd left, swearing never to return. But the mountain didn't care about his oaths. It only cared about survival. His pride was a luxury. His daughter's life was a necessity. He woke her before dawn. The air was so cold it felt like breathing glass. "Eliza," he said, his voice a low rumble, "pack your mittens. We're going down." She looked at him, her eyes wide with a feeling he couldn't name. It wasn't just fear. It was curiosity. She was going to see the world he had only described in warnings. He wrapped her in his thickest furs, loaded the sled with the last of his valuable pelts, beaver and fox, and tied on his snowshoes. He hated this. He hated the weakness of it, the desperation. He was leaving his sanctuary, his fortress of truth, to walk back into the very den of lies he had fled. He was doing it for her. And as they stepped out into the blinding white of the new day, Josiah Thorne had no way of knowing that the hunger in his belly was nothing compared to the starvation in his past, and the lie he was about to face was far more brutal than the winter. The descent was a betrayal of every vow Josiah had made to himself. Each step down the winding goat path, snow sucking at his boots, felt like a concession. The air grew thicker, heavier, clinging to him. He hated it. It was the air of compromise, the air of men. Eliza, perched on his shoulders for the steepest parts, was a silent observer. She had never been this low. The world, which she had only ever known as a realm of white peaks and blue sky, was now a dizzying, crowded canvas of browns and grays. The granite mountains loomed behind them, a wall of silent judgment. Josiah felt their eyes on his back. He was a king leaving his kingdom, a bear walking into a trap for a bit of bait. He clutched the straps of his sled, the furs piled high, a reminder of what he was trading, the wild's honest currency, for the tainted scraps of the lowlands. "Father, what is that sound?" Eliza whispered, her voice muffled by her scarf. He paused, listening. It was a dull, rhythmic clang. "A blacksmith," he growled. "A man who shoes horses." "What are horses?" she asked. Josiah's jaw tightened. How to explain a world he had tried to erase? "Like deer," he said finally. "But men have broken them." Eliza pondered this. Why would they break them? "Because men prefer broken things," he said, and left it at that. Despair's past didn't reveal itself all at once. It seeped into the senses. First came the smell, a sour miasma of coal smoke, unwashed bodies, stale beer, and something metallic he couldn't place. It made Josiah's stomach clench. He was used to the clean, sharp scent of pine and ice. This was the smell of decay, of too many people crowded into one small space, their miseries mingling in the air. Then came the town itself, a single muddy street carved into the valley floor, lined with false-fronted buildings that leaned on each other for support, as if exhausted. The saloon, the general store, the hotel, and at the far end a stark white church, its steeple piercing the gray sky like a splinter. It was the church his father had built, the one from which his father had reigned. Josiah pulled his fur cap lower, trying to disappear inside his own bulk. He was a giant here. Men in town clothes, thin and pale, stopped to stare. Their eyes lingered on his broad frame, his buckskin clothing, the size of his hands. They looked at him like a curiosity, a beast from the hills. He felt their judgment, their fear, their envy. He hated them all. He set Eliza down on the boardwalk, which was slick with mud and tobacco spit. "Stay close," he commanded. "Do not let go of my hand. Do not speak to anyone." Eliza's eyes were as wide as saucers. She clung to his leg, overwhelmed. The noise, the sheer unrelenting noise. Men shouting, a piano jangling tunelessly from the saloon, dogs barking, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer. It was a cacophony. In the mountains, the only sounds were the wind, the cry of a hawk, the crunch of their own snowshoes. This was a violation. He pushed open the door to the general store. The bell above it jangled, a weak, tinny sound. The proprietor, a small man with spectacles and a stained apron, looked up. His eyes went from Josiah to Eliza, and a flicker of recognition, or perhaps just fear, crossed his face. He knew who Josiah was. Everyone here knew, the son who had vanished. The son of the man who owned this town, body and soul. "Thorne," the man breathed, wiping his hands on his apron. We thought you were dead. I need supplies." Josiah's voice was a rumble, vibrating with disuse. "Flour, salt, beans, lard. He untied the sled's ropes and threw the bundle of prime beaver pelts onto the counter. The sound was a heavy, rich thud. This will cover it. The proprietor's eyes widened at the quality of the furs. This was a king's ransom. This was more than the man saw in a month. Yes, sir, Mr. Thorne. Right away, sir. Josiah bristled at the sir. It was the term of a servant, a title of the lowlands. While the man scurried to fill the order, Eliza, growing bolder, tugged on his hand. Father, look! She pointed a mittened finger out the grimy window. The houses are all sick. He followed her gaze. The houses were indeed sick, paint peeling, porches sagging, chimneys leaking black smoke. They are not sick, Eliza. They are just old, worn out. Like my boots? Yes, like your boots. He looked back at the street, his gaze sweeping the pathetic town. He wanted to be gone. He wanted the clean air in his lungs. He wanted to climb back into the sky, back to his fortress. His supplies were almost packed. He could feel the escape, the moment he could turn his back on this place for another year, maybe forever. He paid the man, or rather, the man took a fraction of the pelts and pushed the rest back, his hands shaking, and began loading his sled. He was just retying the ropes, his back to the street, when he heard her voice, that small, clear, curious voice that was the only music in his life. Father? He didn't look up, focused on the knot. Hold on, Eliza, we're leaving. Father, she insisted, tugging his sleeve. Her voice was different now, not curious. Confused, he grunted, pulling the rope tight. What is it? Pie, she said, reverting to the name she used when she was very small, the one he hadn't heard in years. Isn't that Grandma who died? Josiah froze. The rope went slack in his hands. Every muscle in his body turned to stone. It was the whisper of a child, but it hit him like a physical blow, like the kick of a mule to the chest. He thought he had misheard. He thought it was the wind, a trick of the noise. But he had heard her. He had heard the words, Grandma died. His blood ran cold, colder than any mountain stream. Slowly, like a man turning to face a grizzly, he turned his head. He followed the line of his daughter's small pointing finger. She was pointing across the street, toward the town's only hotel, a sad, dilapidated building called the Miner's Rest. And there, on the porch, was a ghost. A woman, stooped and thin, her hair a shock of iron gray, was sweeping the dirty boardwalk. She was dressed in rags. Her hands, even from this distance, looked raw and chapped. She was just a town drudge, another broken thing in a town full of them. But she wasn't. Josiah's world, the one he had built on granite and ice, and a 15-year-old rage, fractured. The man who faced blizzards without flinching, who could stare down a wolf, could not breathe. The woman sweeping the dust was not a ghost. It was Maeve, his mother. The air in Josiah's lungs turned to ice and then to nothing. He was no longer in the valley. He was in a void, a place without wind, without rock, without truth. The sled rope, forgotten, slipped from his numb fingers and fell into the mud. He heard Eliza's voice again, a distant echo. Father, she looks very cold. Why is Grandma sweeping the dirt? Grandma. The word was a hammer blow against the fragile glass of his reality. He had mourned this woman. He had spent his boyhood hardening his heart against the memory of her. The mother his father had told him had run off with a gambler, a weak woman who had died of shame in a gutter somewhere in the territories. He had grieved her. Then he had despised her. And finally, he had buried her in the cold, hard ground of his memory. And there she was, sweeping. Josiah's breath returned in a ragged, silent gasp. It wasn't her. It couldn't be. It was a town vagrant, a broken woman who happened to resemble the faded tintype he kept in his pack, the one he only looked at when the loneliness of the high peaks became too much. But the set of her shoulders, the way she held her head even in a posture of servitude, It was a phantom clawing its way into the real world. As if feeling the weight of his stare, the woman paused. The rhythmic shush-shush of her broom stilled. She moved slowly, her body stiff with cold and years of hard labor. She turned her head, first just a fraction, then fully, looking across the street. Her eyes, washed out and tired, swept past the store, past the sled, and then they found him. Time stopped. The jangling piano from the saloon, the clang of the hammer, the shouts of men, it all vanished, sucked into the terrible, silent vacuum that stretched between them. Her eyes were not the warm brown he remembered from boyhood. They were the color of ash, hollowed out by a sorrow that mirrored his own, but they were hers. The moment she saw him, her hand flew to her mouth, a gesture so familiar it cracked his composure. The broom clattered to the boardwalk. Her face, a roadmap of pain and lost years, crumpled. It was not the joy of reunion. It was the shock of a ghost seeing a ghost. Josiah? The name was a breath, a prayer, a curse. It didn't carry across the street, but he saw it on her lips. He saw it, and the lie that had defined his entire adult life detonated. The rage that followed was nothing like the clean fire of a mountain storm. It was a cold, black, suffocating sickness. He had built his life on her death. His solitude was a monument to her loss. His hatred for the world of men, his retreat into the wilderness, his very identity as the last true thorn, it was all a house of cards, built on a rotten foundation. And the man who had laid that foundation, his father, was just up the street, in that white church, preaching of truth. The hypocrisy of it, the sheer, profound cruelty, choked him. He looked at the proprietor of the store, who was now frozen by the door, his face pale. He looked at the few faces on the street, now turned to watch this silent, terrible drama. They knew. He could see it in their averted eyes, in their sudden interest in the mud at their feet. They knew. This whole town was a party to the lie. "Father, your hands are shaking," Eliza whispered, her small voice cutting through his paralysis. She was frightened now, not of the town, but of him, of the stranger he was becoming. He looked down at his hands. They were clenched so tightly his knuckles were white, trembling with a violence he hadn't felt since his youth. He forced them open, one finger at a time. He took a breath, then another. He looked back at his mother, Maeve, known here, he would later learn, only as Agnes, the hotel's silent drudge, the widow who worked for scraps. She hadn't moved. She was trapped in his gaze, as terrified of him as he was of the truth she represented. He took a step. The mud sucked at his boot, trying to hold him back, to keep him in the old lie. He took another. He left the sled. He left the supplies. He crossed the street. Each step was a lifetime. He was not the mountain man now, the self-sufficient king of the peaks. He was a boy, walking toward the mother he thought had abandoned him. He stopped 3 feet from her. He was a mountain casting a shadow over her, but he felt small. He couldn't find his voice. What was there to say? Why? Where were you? I thought you were dead. All the words were useless, pebbles against the avalanche of her presence. He just looked at her, at the gray hair, the worn-out dress, the broken nails, the unmistakable eyes. And in that silence, he didn't see the woman who had died of shame. He saw a woman who had survived. She was a reflection of him, just as marked, just as solitary, just as broken, by the same man. The confrontation was a silent one, but it was as violent as any mountain storm. Josiah stood before Maeve, a monolith of frozen rage and confusion. He was a man who lived by a simple code. The world was what it was. A rock was a rock. The snow was cold. The dead were dead. And now the dead were sweeping a porch. The very granite foundation of his world had turned to dust beneath his feet. He had no words. His throat, accustomed to the silence of the peaks, was locked. He had spent 15 years building a fortress of grief around a single, hard truth. Now he saw that fortress was a prison, and the truth was a lie. Maeve, his mother, was just as frozen. She looked at this giant of a man, this stranger wearing her son's eyes, and she was terrified. This was not the boy she had been forced to leave. This was a wild thing, a force of the mountain. He looked at her with an intensity that burned, and she didn't know if it was love or hate. She had spent a decade and a half in this purgatory, this town run by the man who had cast her out, her ex-husband, Josiah's father. He had banished her from his home and then, through his influence, ensured she could never leave the valley. He had forced her into this life of servitude, a living ghost, to remind everyone of his power. Her son had been told she was dead. It was a cleaner break, her ex-husband had decided. And now, that son was here. It was Eliza who broke the spell. She had let go of her father's hand and crept forward, her small, fur-lined boots making no sound on the dusty boardwalk. She was a creature of the wild, and she sensed no threat from this sad, weeping woman. She only sensed the cold. She looked up at her father, who was still locked in his terrible silence, and then at the woman. Eliza had never seen an adult cry like this, with such quiet, profound despair. She knew the cold. The cold was an enemy. This woman was cold. Eliza stepped forward past her father's legs. She reached out her small, mittened hand and gently touched the woman's chapped, raw fingers, the ones still clutching the broom handle. "You are very cold," Eliza stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "Your hands are shaking. Where are your mittens?" That simple, innocent touch, that practical question, was the avalanche. Maeve let out a sound, a choked sob that was torn from the deepest part of her. She dropped the broom and sank to her knees, her body overwhelmed by the touch of this small, impossible child, her grandchild. She looked at Eliza's face, seeing the echo of her own family, the life that had been stolen from her. Josiah flinched, as if struck. The sound of his mother's sob, a sound he hadn't heard since he was a boy, pierced his rage. He looked down and saw his daughter's hand on his mother's. He saw the pure, honest pity of the mountain in his child. Eliza, who knew nothing of lies or shame, was simply trying to warm a person who was cold. The gesture was so clean, so true, it made his own complex knot of pain feel dirty. "Eliza, move away from her," Josiah managed to say, but his voice was choked, uncertain. He had no protocol for this. "But father, she is cold," Eliza insisted, turning to look at him, her face a mask of genuine confusion. "We have an extra blanket on the sled. We should give it to her. Give it to her." The simple charity of it was a knife in Josiah's gut. He was staring at his mother, the woman he had mourned, and his daughter was offering her a blanket. The absurdity, the tragedy of it, was suffocating. "Agnes, get back to work. That porch won't sweep itself." The voice was sharp, oily, and it came from the hotel's doorway. A large man in a stained vest, the hotel owner, stood glaring. "And you, Thorne, take your brat and your business elsewhere. We don't want your kind here." Josiah turned his head. The movement was slow, deliberate. He looked at the hotel owner, a man named Silas Croft, a known toady of his father's. The man's petty cruelty, his casual dismissal of Eliza as a brat, his ownership of the woman he called Agnes's, it all focused Josiah's blinding, untethered rage into a single, deadly point. He said nothing. He simply looked at Croft. It was the look he gave a wolf before it decided to back away. It was a look of pure, cold finality. Croft, who was used to bullying the broken, faltered. He took an involuntary step back, his bluster vanishing. Josiah turned back to his mother, who was still kneeling, her face buried in her hands. He had come to town for flour and salt. He had come to ensure his daughter's survival. He had walked into the wreckage of his entire life. The man who had entered despair's pass was gone. The man who stood on this boardwalk, his world shattered, was someone new, someone more dangerous. He had lived his life by the mountain's code. The code was simple. You protect what is yours. He had believed his mother was dead. Now she was here. She was a survivor, just like him. She was his. And this town, this den of lies, had her in a cage. He made a decision. It was not a reasoned thought. It was an instinct, as pure and undeniable as the pull of gravity. He had not come down the mountain for a fight, but the mountain had just followed him down. Josiah's world, having cracked, now shattered. The rage that had frozen him was so cold and pure it burned. He saw the hotel owner, Croft, a fleshy man whose vest was stained with gravy and arrogance, still sneering from the doorway. He heard Eliza's confusion. He saw his mother, Maeve, shrinking under the man's voice, a conditioned reflex of fear. And in that instant, the complex, suffocating knot of 15 years of grief and anger simplified. It resolved into a single, hard point. This was not his mother's shame. This was his father's crime. This town, this man, this life of servitude, it was a cage. And the mountain man, who lived his life in the open sky, could not abide a cage. He ignored Croft's sputtering. He ignored the eyes of the townsfolk, who were now gathering, sensing the shift in the air, the smell of a confrontation far more dangerous than a saloon brawl. He turned his back on the hotel, his movements deliberate, heavy. He walked back to his sled. Eliza, frightened, scurried after him. "Father, are we going home?" He didn't answer. The town held its breath. They thought the giant was retreating. They thought the ghost of Josiah Thorne, having seen his own ghost, was fleeing back to the rocks and ice. He reached the sled. He grabbed the heavy pull rope, but he did not turn toward the mountain path. He turned, and with a grunt that seemed to pull from the very bedrock, he dragged the sled, laden with his supplies and the immense wealth of his winter's hunt, across the muddy street. The runners squealed in the filth. He stopped directly in front of the hotel, directly in front of Silas Croft. Josiah dropped the rope. He stood over the hotel owner, his shadow falling across the porch, plunging the smaller man into a sudden, cold darkness. "What is her debt?" Josiah's voice was not a shout. It was a low, grinding sound, like boulders shifting, a sound that held the threat of an avalanche. Croft, unnerved by this proximity, by the sheer, contained violence in the man, tried to recover his bluster. "Debt? She has no debt. She's a charity case. A drudge. She works for her keep. Now get off my porch, Thorne, before I fetch the sheriff." Josiah looked past him, at his mother, who was now huddled against the wall, watching with wide, terrified eyes. Then he looked back at Croft. "In this town," Josiah said, "everything has a price. Everyone has a debt. What is hers?" He didn't wait for an answer. He turned to the sled, his movements economical and swift. He seized the heavy, oilskin-wrapped bundle of his prime pelts. The silver fox, the ermine, the flawless beaver. This was his life's work. This was the currency of the mountain, pure and earned. He hefted the bundle. It must have weighed 50 pounds and threw it. It landed at Croft's feet with a heavy, wet thud, splashing mud onto the man's polished boots. The crowd gasped. That bundle of fur was worth more than this entire rotten building. "That," Josiah rumbled, "is for the broom she dropped." Croft stared at the furs, his eyes wide with an avarice that was stronger than his fear. He was calculating. "Now," Josiah said, his voice dropping, "you will tell me what she owes." Croft saw the madness in the mountain man's eyes, the utter lack of compromise, and he knew this was not a negotiation. He had to invent a cage to justify the payment. She had a debt," Croft stammered, his eyes darting toward the pelts. "Years ago. Lodging. Food. It's $100. It was an astronomical, impossible sum. A lie to cover a deeper one." Josiah didn't blink. He nodded once. "The furs cover it." He had just bought his mother. He turned away from the grasping, cowardly hotel owner. He faced Maeve, who was looking at him, her face a mask of utter, heartbreaking disbelief. She had been invisible for 15 years, and now her son had just paid a fortune for her. He held out his hand, the same massive, calloused hand that his daughter had said was shaking. It was steady now. Maeve. He said her name. The name Agnes was a lie, and he was done with lies. Get up. This was it. The public declaration. The point of no return. He had not just acknowledged her. He had claimed her. In front of the town, in front of his father's spies, he had thrown his lot in with hers. Maeve looked at his outstretched hand. It was the hand of a stranger, but it was the hand of her son. She looked at the furs in the mud, at the stunned face of her tormentor, and then back at Josiah. She placed her own thin, icy fingers into his palm. He closed his hand around hers, his grip gentle but absolute, and pulled her to her feet. She was frail, lighter than he could have imagined, a bird made of hollow bones. But she was alive. "Eliza," Josiah said, his voice softening for the first time. "Take your grandmother's other hand." Eliza, who only understood that her father had fixed the problem, that the sad woman was no longer cold, beamed. She rushed forward and grabbed Maeve's free hand, slipping her own small mitten into the woman's frozen fingers. Josiah turned, one hand holding his mother, the other grabbing the sled rope. He slung the heavy sacks of flour and beans onto his own back. He had come to Despair's Pass for supplies to keep one person alive. He was leaving with a new, impossible family. The people of the town parted for him, silent, awestruck. They had just witnessed a reckoning. The mountain man, the town's ghost story, had walked out of the wilderness, faced the town's ugliest secret, and bought his past. As the three of them began the long walk toward the mountain path, the giant, the ghost, and the child, Josiah Thorne, was no longer a man running from a lie. He was a son, walking toward a truth. The journey up was a silent, brutal war against gravity and the past. Josiah set a punishing pace, his body fueled by the black, roiling adrenaline of the confrontation. He had slung the heavy sacks of flour and beans onto his own back, his muscles straining, and with his free hand, he hauled the sled. His other hand held his mother's. Or rather, he held her wrist, pulling her along in his wake. A piece of reclaimed property, a ghost tethered to the living. The wind was picking up, a high, thin, keen that signaled a change in the weather. The mountain was impatient. It did not care for the dramas of the lowlands and was eager to scourge them clean. Eliza, bless her innocent heart, held Maeve's other hand. She was the only one who spoke, her small voice a strange counterpoint to the wind and the heavy gasping breaths of the two adults. "This is the path we take," she announced brightly to her new grandmother. "See, that's the angry rock. Father says it looks like a man shouting, and that's where the falcons live." Maeve, her lungs burning in the thinning air, could only nod. She was not made for this. Her body, systematically starved and overworked for 15 years, was a frail, brittle thing. Every step was agony. Her shoes, thin and worn, were already soaked through with snow. Her legs trembled, threatening to buckle. She had forgotten the altitude, forgotten the sheer, unrelenting verticality of this world. Josiah felt her faltering. He felt the drag on his arm, the stumbles, the hitches in her breathing. A dark, ugly part of him, a voice that sounded chillingly like his father, whispered, "She's weak. She was always weak. She'll never make it." He hated that voice, but it was there. A poison he'd lived with for so long he'd mistaken it for his own. He was angry at her weakness. He was angry that he had to slow his pace. He had saved her, a grand, sweeping gesture of defiance. Now he was stuck with the reality of her, a frail, 50-year-old woman who was a stranger. "Josiah," she gasped, her voice raw. "Please, just a moment." He stopped, turning to her. His face was a hard mask of granite, unreadable in the fading light. He said nothing. He just waited, his own breathing deep and steady, a silent accusation. "Eliza, sensing the tension, looked from one to the other. "Grandma is tired, Father. Can we have some water?" This, he understood. This was a practical need. He unhooked his canteen and handed it to Maeve. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold it. She spilled more than she drank, the precious water dark on her ragged coat. I can't," she whispered, her eyes brimming with the first tears he had seen. She looked away from him, at the unforgiving path ahead, a sheer switchback of ice and stone. "Josiah, you should have left me. I am not what you think. I'm not. I can't." She sank to her knees in the snow, a gesture of complete and final defeat. "Go. Take the child. I'm done." This was the moment. The turning point on a knife edge of ice. The old narrative, his father's narrative, surged in him. She's given up, just like he said. Weak. He could leave her. He could tell himself he tried. He could take Eliza and retreat to his fortress. His lie only slightly altered. He had come for her, but she was too weak to follow. He could live with that. He looked down at her, a crumpled gray shape in the snow, her body shaking with sobs. Then he looked at Eliza. His daughter was watching him, her face pale, her eyes wide with a terrible knowing fear. She was not watching her grandmother. She was watching him. She was waiting to see what her father, her God, the center of her world, would do to a person who had fallen. In that instant, his father's voice died. It was not a decision. It was a shedding. He saw not the weak woman who had given up. He saw the survivor who had endured 15 years in that hellish town. He saw the woman who had knelt in the mud and wept at the touch of a child. He saw his mother. He let go of the sled rope. He stepped toward her. Maeve flinched, expecting a blow, or worse, the final, terrible word. Goodbye. Josiah crouched in front of her. He was still a mountain, but he was no longer an avalanche. He was a refuge. Get up. His voice was not kind. It was not gentle. It was the voice of the mountain itself, harsh, unyielding, and absolute. It was the code. But I cannot, she wept. I am too tired. The mountain doesn't care if you are tired, he growled. It only cares if you move. We do not die here. He slid one massive arm under her legs, the other behind her back. She weighed nothing. He lifted her as if she were a child, as if she were Eliza. Maeve let out a startled cry. He was carrying her. This giant of a man, her son, was carrying her. He settled her weight, then looked at Eliza. Take the sled rope, daughter, and do not let go. He turned and began to climb. He was carrying his mother, his supplies were on his back, and his daughter was hauling the sled behind him. He was carrying his entire world. It was a punishing, impossible burden. His lungs burned, his legs turned to fire, but with every step, he felt the 15-year-old poison leaving his body, sweating out of his pores. He was not his father. Maeve, held against his chest, felt the hammer of his heart, the sheer, animal strength of him. This was not the boy she had lost. This was a man. And he had not left her. He was hard, he was cold, he was terrifying. But he had not left her. For the first time in 15 years, she stopped being a victim. She found a sliver of will, a core of iron she didn't know she possessed. Put me down, she said, her voice stronger. He stopped. Put me down, Josiah. I can walk. He looked at her, his eyes searching hers in the dusk. He saw the change. He saw the granite. He set her on her feet. She was still weak, but she was no longer defeated. I will not be carried, she said. He nodded once. He handed her the sled rope. Eliza, hold my hand. He took his daughter's hand, and Maeve, his mother, took up the burden of the sled. Together, the three of them, a broken and remade family, took the last, hardest steps up the path. They reached the cabin in full darkness. It was a black shape against the stars. It was his fortress. He pushed open the heavy door. The small space was cold and dark. It was no longer just his and Eliza's. The past had followed him home. The three of them stood on the threshold. A mountain man, a child of the wild, and a ghost. And together, they stepped inside. The cabin, once Josiah's silent fortress, was now a crowded, noisy, complicated space. It was too small for three people, especially when one of them was a ghost and the other was a giant used to living alone. The first few days were a war of unspoken tensions. Josiah's orderly, solitary world where his cup had one spot, his knife another was shattered. Maeve, his mother, existed in this space with the hesitant, shuffling energy of a stray dog, terrified to displease, yet desperate for warmth. She flinched every time he moved suddenly. She apologized for taking up space, for the extra wood he had to chop, for the food she ate. Her weakness, her 15 years of ingrained servitude, grated on Josiah's nerves. He wanted the strong, warm mother of his memory, not this trembling, broken creature who wept silently when she thought no one was looking. He had saved her, and now he was trapped with her, and the paradox of it soured the air. "Father, why does Grandma sleep by the door?" Eliza asked one morning, her voice loud in the small cabin. Josiah was skinning a rabbit, his movements sharp and angry. "It's cold there." Maeve, who had indeed made a bed of spare furs by the door, the traditional place of a servant, froze. I like the air, child." "It's fine." Josiah's knife stilled. He hadn't told her where to sleep. She had simply chosen the worst spot, as if expecting to be kicked. The sight of it, his mother curled by a drafty door, was a constant, burning reprimand. "You will sleep on the cot," Josiah said, not looking at her. "Eliza and I will take the floor." "Oh no, Josiah, I couldn't. I'm fine, really. I did not ask," he growled. It was an order, not an offer. The harshness in his voice was his only shield against the vulnerability that was clawing at him, the fear of this new, fragile thing he now had to protect. Eliza was the bridge. She had no history, no concept of the lies that separated them. To her, Maeve was simply Grandma, a new, fascinating person who was soft and smelled like the before time her father never spoke of. "Grandma, why are your hands so rough?" Eliza asked, tracing the calloused, scarred palms of the woman who was trying to teach her how to mend a stocking. Maeve's hands trembled. I did a lot of sweeping, child, and washing." "Why?" "It was my work." "Did you like your work?" Maeve was quiet for a long time. "No," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "No, I did not." "Then why did you do it?" Eliza's questions were as clean and sharp as obsidian. Josiah sat by the fire, pretending to sharpen his axe, but he was listening to every word. This was the conversation he was incapable of having. Maeve looked at her son's broad, powerful back. He was turned away from her, a wall of buckskin and muscle, but he was listening. She knew it. She had to speak. She had to unwound the lie, or it would strangle them all. "I didn't have a choice, Eliza," Maeve said, her voice gaining a thin, reedy strength. Your grandfather, Josiah's father, Josiah turned. His face was dark, the firelight catching the hard planes of his cheeks. "He told me you were dead," he said. It was not a question, it was an accusation. Maeve met his gaze. The fear in her eyes was still there, but beneath it, a spark of the woman she had been. "He told you a lie. He is a man who builds his world with lies. He said you ran away, that you were weak, that you died of shame." Each word was a stone he was forced to pull from his own throat. Maeve let out a short, bitter laugh that turned into a cough. "Weak? Perhaps, but I did not run." She looked at her hands, at the broken nails, the geography of her servitude. "He drove me out. When I questioned him, when I stood up for a girl in the town he had wronged, he said my heart was as corrupt as hers. He threw me from the house, from his house. He kept you, You were his heir, his property. I was replaceable. Josiah's axe head was white-knuckled in his grip. You could have left. You could have gone to another town. You could have... Could I? Maeve's voice was sharp now. He owns this valley, Josiah. He owned the stage line. He owned the sheriff. He owned the store. Where would I go? How? He didn't want me dead. He wanted me there. He wanted me alive and broken. He wanted me to sweep the porch of the hotel he owned, to wash the floors in the saloon he profited from. He wanted everyone in that town, and most of all, me, to see, every single day, what happens to a woman who defies him. The truth landed, a physical, sickening weight. His mother was not weak. She was a prisoner of war. She hadn't died of shame. She had been kept in a cage of it, a living ghost to prove his father's power. Josiah stood up. The movement was so sudden, so violent, that Eliza whimpered and Maeve flinched. He walked to the cabin door and stared out at the snow, his whole body trembling. The mountain, his sanctuary, his refuge from the world of men, suddenly felt like a lie. He had not chosen this life. He had been driven to it. His exile was not an act of strength. It was a reaction to his father's poison. He had been running from a ghost, while the real victim was sweeping porches. He had hated the world for its weakness, not for its cruelty. He will pay for this, Josiah whispered. The words were a vow, an oath, sworn to the unforgiving wind. No, Josiah, Maeve said, coming to stand behind him. She did not touch him. He has already lost. He lost you, and now he has lost the lie. Josiah turned to her. He truly looked at her for the first time, not as the ghost of his memory, not as the drudge from the hotel, but as Maeve, a survivor, stronger than he had ever been. He saw the iron in her spine, the granite in her eyes. He is not your father. He is not my husband. He is just a man, a small, cold man. And we are here. The cabin, which had felt so small and crowded, suddenly felt right. It was no longer his fortress. It was their refuge. The snow began to fall, thick and heavy, sealing them in. That night, Josiah watched his mother, Maeve, sitting by the fire, the sleeping Eliza's head in her lap. She was humming a song, a tune from his boyhood he had long since buried, a tune about a river flowing to the sea. He sat across from them, oiling his rifle, the simple, domestic sound washing over him. The ice that had encased his heart for 15 years did not just crack. It broke. It gave way. He felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. It was a strange, terrifying, and profound peace. He was no longer the last thorn, the mountain's lonely king. He was a son, and this was his family. The cabin became a crucible. The heavy snows of deep winter sealed them in, a white curtain drawn across the world, forcing the three of them into an intimacy that was both suffocating and healing. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the small sounds of a life being rebuilt. The scrape of Maeve's needle against tough hide, the whisper of Eliza's questions, the steady, rhythmic thump of Josiah chopping wood just outside the door, a sound that was both a comfort and a constant reminder of his restless energy. Josiah watched. It was his nature. He was a man who learned by observing, and he observed his mother as one would a strange, new creature of the woods. He saw her, in the first few weeks, try to revert to her old role. She would wake first, long before the sun, and try to start the fire, her chapped hands fumbling with the flint. She would serve him his food first, taking only the scraps for herself. She would jump to clean any mess, her body tensed, waiting for a reprimand. "That is not your place," he said one morning, his voice rough. She had handed him the best piece of smoked rabbit, her eyes downcast. "Your place is at the table." He took the plate and roughly spooned half of the portion back onto her own tin plate. He didn't know how to be gentle, so he was simply fair. It was the only language he had. For Maeve, this gruff, forceful offering was more shocking than a blow. It was an act of provision. She looked at the food, then at him, and for the first time, she ate without apology. Eliza, who had only ever known her father's stark practical lessons, was mesmerized by Maeve. Her father had taught her how to survive. Her grandmother was teaching her how to live. "Sing it again, Grandma," Eliza would beg, curled by the fire. Maeve's voice was thin, but it was sweet. She sang old songs from the lowlands, songs about green valleys and ocean ships, things Eliza couldn't even imagine. Josiah would sit in the shadows, mending a snowshoe, and pretend not to listen. But he heard them. He remembered them. They were the songs his mother had sung to him, the ones his father had declared frivolous and sinful before casting them out of the house, along with everything else soft. He found the sound of her voice anchoring him, stitching his own ragged past back together. Maeve, in turn, began to heal. The mountain air, which at first had seemed so brutal, was clean. It scoured the scent of the hotel's back rooms from her lungs. The food, though simple, was plentiful. The hollows in her cheeks began to fill out. The constant trembling fear that had been her companion for 15 years began to recede. She stopped flinching when Josiah entered the cabin. She began to take up space. She organized the shelves, her hands finding a new, confident purpose. She cooked, and the cabin, which had always smelled of wood smoke and curing pelts, began to smell of baking bread and herbed stew. She was not just a survivor, she was a nester. She was turning his fortress into a home. One afternoon, Josiah was teaching Eliza how to read the clouds. "See that?" he rumbled, pointing a thick finger at the sky. "The way the wind tears the edges? That's a mare's tail. It means the weather will turn hard in 2 days. "And that one?" Eliza asked. "That one is just a cloud. It means nothing. You learn what to watch, little bird. You don't waste your time on what doesn't matter." Maeve stood in the doorway, watching them. "Your father. He always saw the storm coming," she said, her voice quiet. Josiah turned, surprised she had spoken. He was a boy who never looked at the ground, always at the sky. He wanted to know what was coming. 10. He was never afraid of the storm. He just wanted to be ready for it. It was the first time she had offered a memory of him, a piece of his own past. He didn't know how to respond. He just grunted and looked back at the sky, but his chest felt tight. Later that day, Eliza, emboldened, asked the question he never could. "Grandma, was he like me, when he was small?" Maeve smiled. The expression was new, fragile. "Oh, goodness. No, child. You are quiet. You watch. Your father, he was a roar. He was a small boy with the heart of a thunderstorm. He climbed everything. He broke everything. He was so full of life." Josiah, mending a trap, stopped. A thunderstorm. He had never thought of himself that way. He had only ever been the quiet one, the one who retreated. "And his father?" Eliza whispered, as if sensing the danger in the name. Maeve's smile faded. "His father saw that thunderstorm, and he was afraid of it. He tried to put it in a bottle. He tried to stop the thunder. He believed a boy should be silent. He believed love was a weakness, a corruption." Josiah's hands were still. He was back in his childhood, in a dark, paneled room, his father's voice telling him that his love for his mother was a sickness of the soul. He realized his father hadn't just lied about Maeve's death. He had been lying about everything. He had been trying to stop the thunder in his son, to make him silent, to break him, just as he had broken Maeve. That night, the storm hit, just as Josiah had predicted. It was a howling white fury. The cabin groaned under the assault. Eliza, who was usually stoic, whimpered in her sleep. Maeve, however, was calm. She sat by the fire, mending one of Josiah's buckskin shirts. He watched her. She was not the frail, trembling woman from the hotel. "This storm does not frighten you," he stated. Maeve looked up, her needle pausing. "It is a clean sound," she said. "It's just the wind. It's not." A man's voice, angry in the next room. "It's not a door slamming. It's honest. Like you said, Josiah. This place is honest." In that moment, he saw her. He saw the iron. She had endured 15 years of psychological torture, and she was not broken. She was, in her own way, a mountain. She had just been buried. He got up and crossed the small room. He sat near her, not beside her, but close enough to share the fire's heat. "You are strong," he said. The words came out hard, like stones. It was the highest compliment he knew how to give. Maeve looked at him, her eyes clear in the firelight. "And you are kind," she replied. Josiah flinched. "I am not kind. You are. You hide it, even from yourself. You think kindness is a weakness. The same lie your father told you." She held up the shirt she was mending. The stitches were small, neat, perfect. But it is not. It is what holds things together. It is what makes a home. He looked at the stitches, at the care she had taken. He looked at his sleeping daughter. He looked at his mother, her face softened by the fire. The storm raged outside, but inside the small cabin, for the first time in his life, Josiah Thorne felt a profound and terrifying calm. The spring thaw was a slow, grudging affair in the high granites. The snow, which had been their white, silent fortress, began to recede, revealing the hard, wet earth beneath. The cabin, once a sealed-off haven, now felt open, vulnerable. But the life within it had taken root. Maeve had claimed the small space with a quiet authority, her presence smoothing the cabin's rough edges, just as her songs had smoothed Josiah's. He found himself carving not just axe handles, but small, useless things. A wooden bird for Eliza, a smooth comb for Maeve's hair, which was growing thicker with less gray. He was a man unlearning a lifetime of hardness. The three of them had become a single, breathing thing. A family, forged not of blood, but of shared survival and a quiet, profound respect. This new, fragile peace was shattered on a day when the air smelled of meltwater and new pine. It was Eliza who heard it first. Her wild, raised senses were sharper than theirs. She put down the doll Maeve had sewn for her from scraps of buckskin. "Father," she whispered. "A horse." Josiah was on his feet in an instant, the half-carved bird dropping to the floor. His rifle was in his hands before he had even registered a conscious thought. A horse, up here, on this path, in this season? The path was a treacherous river of mud and ice. Only a desperate man would try it. He moved to the door, shielding Maeve and Eliza behind him. Through the trees, he saw it. A horse, its flanks heaving, lathered in sweat, slipping and sliding, and on its back, a man he recognized. It was not his father. It was Eben, the blacksmith, a quiet man who had shod Josiah's first pony, a man who had always looked at Josiah's father with a quiet, knowing contempt. Eben nearly fell from the saddle, his face gray with exhaustion and fear. "Josiah," he gasped, stumbling toward the cabin, his hands up. "I'm alone. You gotta go. You gotta get, now." Josiah's rifle didn't waver. "Get inside. Talk." Eben stumbled in, his eyes wide as he saw Maeve. He nodded to her, as if seeing a ghost, but having no time to be surprised. "He knows, Josiah." Eben panted, collapsing onto a stool. "Croft, the hotel man. He rode to your father's church the same day you left. Told him everything." Maeve's hand flew to her mouth. Josiah's face was stone. "He said you'd gone full savage," Eben rushed on, the words tumbling out. "Said you'd pulled a knife, threatened the town, and that you'd kidnapped your mother." that you were holding her against her will. He's a liar, Josiah rumbled. It don't matter. Eben slammed his fist on the small table. Your father, he's been undone. The whole town, see it, they've been whispering. Croft's story made your father look like a fool, a man who couldn't control his own family. A preacher whose wife wasn't dead, but a drudge in his own town. He's broke, Josiah, and he's blaming you. He's saying you're an abomination. That Maeve's mind is gone. That Eliza, that she's some devil's spawn of the mountain. Josiah's grip on his rifle was so tight, his knuckles were white. He's telling everyone he's going up the mountain to cleanse it, to save his wife's soul and bring his savage son to justice. He's not coming with the sheriff's son. He's coming with guns. He's hired 6 men from the territories, men who fought in the wars, killers. The cabin, which had become a home, suddenly felt like a trap. The deep snow that had been their shield was now their prison. The path was the only way in, the only way out. And his father knew the path. When? Josiah's voice was a single cold word. He left this morning. I rode all night. I took the high pass to get ahead of him. You've got a day. Maybe less. God be with you, Josiah. Eben wouldn't stay. He drank a ladle of water and hauled his exhausted body back onto his horse. He won't stop, the blacksmith called down. Not this time. When the sound of the horse faded, the silence that fell was more terrible than any storm. Josiah's calm was gone. The peace of the last few months vanished like a mist. The man who stood in the cabin now was the mountain man, the warrior, the protector. His eyes were flat, cold, and deadly. He moved with a swift, brutal purpose. He barred the heavy door. He shoved the cabin's single table against it, bracing it. He began pulling the sleeping cots apart, intending to use the wood to board up the one small window. Josiah, what are you doing? Maeve's voice was trembling. He is coming, Josiah said, his voice a low growl. Let him come. This is my land. He will not set foot in this cabin. And you'll do what? You'll shoot him? Your own father? He is not my father. He is a man coming to harm my family. The mountain's code is simple. You end a threat. He was becoming a stranger again, the man he had been, the one who lived by a code of pure, cold survival. No. Maeve stepped in front of him, placing her hand on the rifle he was loading. He glared at her, a look that would have sent any other living creature fleeing. She did not flinch. No, Josiah, that is what he wants. Can't you see? She pleaded, her voice desperate. He has been telling the world you are a savage, a beast. He is coming here to prove it. He wants you to fight. He wants you to kill. If you meet his violence with your own, you become the monster he has always said you were. He wins. He will have finally broken you. He will have finally put his thunderstorm in a bottle. He was torn. His entire being, every instinct honed by a decade of solitude, screamed to defend, to fight, to kill. How? He roared, the sound filling the small cabin, making Eliza cry. How do we stop him? Do you think he will talk? Do we just let him take us? Let him take you back to that hotel? Let him take Eliza? Before Maeve could answer, a sound echoed from the valley below, faint but unmistakable. A rifle shot. It was not a hunting shot. It was a signal. They were in the valley. They were coming. Eliza, who had run to Maeve's side, looked at the door, her small face pale. Father? Is that Mr. Eben? Is he hunting? Josiah looked from his crying child to his terrified mother. The time for carving birds was over. The lie his father had built had finally reached his door. He pulled his daughter close, his arm a band of iron around her. No, little bird, he said, his voice cold and hard as the granite peaks. They are hunting us. The cabin, once a fortress, was now a coffin. The single rifle shot echoed, followed by a man's distant, commanding shout. They were here. Josiah's rage became a cold, terrifying calm. His movements were swift. He kicked the small table, sending tin cups scattering, and braced it against the heavy wooden door. Maeve, take Eliza. Get in the root cellar. Now. No, Maeve said. She was not pleading now. Her voice was as cold as his. Josiah, look at me. He was checking the load in his rifle, his back to her. There is no time, go. Look at me, she commanded. He turned, stunned by her force. Her eyes were blazing. The frail, broken woman was gone, and in her place was a matriarch, an equal. He is my husband, she said, her voice shaking but full of iron. He is your father, and he is a monster, but he is a monster of pride. Your bullets will only prove his point. They will make you the savage he needs you to be, and they will make him a martyr. There is no winning that fight. He has killers with him, Josiah growled, the words torn from his throat. He has come to murder us, to murder his own blood. Then let him try to murder me, she said. He has come for his prisoner? He will have her. Before he could react, she moved to the door. Maeve, no! He lunged for her, but she was already fumbling with the heavy bar. You taught me this mountain is honest, she said, her back to him. You taught me to face the bear. He is my bear, Josiah. Let me face him. She lifted the bar. Stay with your daughter. Protect her. Let me protect you. The door creaked open. The cold, gray light of the valley flooded the cabin. And Maeve, his mother, dressed in the mended buckskins he had given her, her hair no longer a drudge's bun but loose and gray and wild, stepped out into the snow. Josiah was frozen. He scrambled to the cabin's one small window, his rifle pressed to the opening, his heart a hammer in his chest. He saw them. 7 men, arrayed in a semicircle, their rifles gleaming. And at their center, his father, Thaddeus Thorne, dressed in black, his face a mask of righteous, terrible fury. When Thaddeus saw Maeve, he actually recoiled. He had expected the giant. He had come for the beast. He was met by the ghost. Maeve! He roared, recovering. His voice was the one Josiah remembered, the one that cracked like a whip. You are alive. He has held you. Step away from that den of sin, woman. We have come to save you. Maeve stood on the small patch of ground before the cabin. She looked at the men, at their guns, and then at her husband. She was not trembling. Save me? Her voice carried, clear and cold as the mountain air. You are the one I needed saving from, Thaddeus. The hired guns shifted, confused. This was not the script. He has corrupted you, Thaddeus shrieked, his composure cracking. His savage ways have poisoned your mind. You are a prisoner. I was a prisoner for 15 years. Maeve called back, her voice ringing with a strength Josiah had never heard. I was your prisoner, Thaddeus. In your town, sweeping your floors. You told our son I was dead. A murmur went through the hired guns. They had signed on to hunt a savage, to rescue a captive. This was complicated. Thaddeus's face went purple. Lies! She is mad! He has bewitched her! Seize her now! But the men hesitated. They looked at each other. This was not a rescue. This was a family dispute. And the man in black looked unhinged. She is not mad. Josiah's voice boomed from the cabin window, a sound like an earthquake. She is my mother, and every word she speaks is the truth. You are the liar, father. Thaddeus spun, his rifle coming up, aimed at the dark window. Savage, abomination, you will pay for this. You will not have her. You will not keep what is mine. He was aiming at his son. He was going to fire. No! Eliza, who had been hiding in Maeve's skirts, broke free. She ran from the cabin, a tiny streak of fur, and launched herself at Maeve, wrapping her arms around her grandmother's legs. Don't hurt Grandma! Don't hurt her! This was the image that broke the world. The hired guns lowered their rifles. A child, an innocent child, clinging to the captive. The narrative was not just broken, it was a joke. Thaddeus Thorne stood alone, his lie exposed, his crusade revealed as nothing but a bitter old man's pride. He looked at his son, hidden. He looked at his wife, defiant. He looked at his granddaughter, the devil's spawn, who was just a little girl. And he broke, his righteousness shattered, leaving only a core of pure black hate. He swung his rifle, not toward Josiah, but toward Maeve, toward the source of his humiliation. "If I cannot cleanse your soul," he screamed, "I will send it to God." He pulled the trigger. But he was not a mountain man. His hands were shaking with rage. The shot was wild. It splintered the doorframe, inches from where Eliza stood. Before he could fire again, the cabin door did not just open, it exploded outward. Josiah Thorne emerged, not as a beast, not as a savage, but as a father. He was not holding his rifle to fire. He was holding it down, at his side. He crossed the few feet of snow in a single bound, and stood in front of his mother and his child. He was a living shield. He was a mountain of a man, and he was unarmed. His intentions clear. He would not kill. He would just be. He would not let this poison touch his family. He stared at his father. He said nothing. The silence was absolute. Thaddeus looked at his son, this giant who had refused to be the monster, this man who had met his murderous rage with nothing but a protector's stance. He looked at Maeve, standing tall behind her son. He looked at the child peeking out. He looked at his hired men, who were now backing away, their faces grim. They had been paid to fight a savage, not to witness a family's execution. They wanted no part of this. One by one they turned and walked away, melting back into the trees. Thaddeus was alone. He looked at the family he had tried to destroy. The giant, the ghost, the child. They were whole. And he was nothing. He had lost. His lies were useless here. His rage was useless. His world was gone. Thaddeus Thorne let out a sound. It was not a word. It was a broken, animal sound of pure, final defeat. His rifle fell from his hands into the snow. He turned, and like a broken old man he stumbled away, down the mountain path defeated by the truth. Josiah stood, his heart hammering, and watched him go. He did not feel triumph. He only felt the quiet. He turned and pulled his mother and his daughter into his arms. The storm had come, and the mountain had held. The mountain had found its peace. And if this story of a family reclaimed found a home in your heart, we'd be honored if you'd let us know. Leave a comment below, telling us what part of Josiah's journey resonated with you most. These stories from the high peaks are for those who understand that true strength isn't about the fight, but about what we choose to protect. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a tale from the wild frontier. We'll be waiting for you, right here, where the air is thin and the legends are forged.